r/AskReddit. What is the thing we don't talk about in your family? My second cousin was always very introverted. Nobody ever really saw him, and he never really met anyone beyond immediate family due to him just not being interested in knowing any of us. He left home and cut everyone off. Hell, I had no idea he existed. Fast forward and my first cousin is excited to bring her husband to the family reunion. The two eloped, so we did not know who this mystery man was. She walks up, and there's a second cousin with her. The older family members knew exactly who he was, and, well, they were expecting and married, so we said fuck it, and just had a family reunion. We don't mention the cousin thing, because it's been acknowledged, and we all decided to move past it as to not make them feel weird. I know a guy who runs a successful used car dealership. I'm trustworthy enough that he told me about how he was failing to make it in American business and had his business fail, which was a store. He used gas stations to launder gas station credit accounts to get enough to get back on his feet so he could fix his first auction cars to get them ready for sale. I bought a car from him about 2 years ago. It's still going with 170+ miles. He's pretty straightforward. He also helped me pressure a fellow used car dealer that was much less scrupulous. I find that people who trust you enough to tell you about their dishonesty without asking you to help or get involved are usually solid folks in a bad spot. If you have a guy start talking to you about a business opportunity, then I'd get away, but if they just need to tell someone and trust you enough, they likely feel guilty and that's their way of releasing some of that pressure. That my family was very involved with a small 50 family top secret cult that included preparing for the end of the world and stockpiling canned goods and water in $1 million barn in the woods surrounded by small cabins. My parents got recruited for this cult when I was 4 years old and left when I was 15. It was our whole life. Everything revolved around it. All our money went into it. My parents can't talk about it. My mother flies into an insane rage. I've never told anyone the whole story start to finish. I doubt I ever will. I could write a book about the bizarre childhood I had. That my mom had a baby at 17 and was forced to give it up for adoption. No one but a few people know, even less who will talk about it. My mom has never recovered from being tricked into giving up her baby. I still wonder if this is what happened to my grandma, or a forced abortion. It was right before WW2, a really super fast whirlwind relationship before my grandpa was deployed, and their letters are really censored, and vague but strong hints of something that happened right after he was deployed. They were married for another almost 50 years after that, but they were both super messed up, totally checked out as parents to my mom and her siblings. Ever since mom finally got to read the letters, I've thought there was probably a decision made that basically ruined the rest of their lives. A few suicidal attention signs many of us used over the years. Kids learn from parents. So when mom said some dark shit to manipulate us a few times, we caved. When we learned it was a bluff, we started doing it, and one of my siblings even cut themselves a few times to get to what they wanted. It's fucked up. Now my mom is in her 60s and has claimed if she goes blind she will kill herself. But that was a few years ago we last heard that claim. My cousin actually committed suicide last year and there has been no cries for attention or manipulation after that. Plus we are all grown now and know better, but it was an emotionally abusive and manipulative way to grow up. My mother's mental health. She hallucinated off and on for years and was never totally stable. She didn't believe there was anything wrong with her and never got help. But she told everyone in the immediate family, and she's mentioned that over the years she discussed her visions with various other people. Like, it's a known thing about her. But we never discussed it among ourselves at home when she wasn't in the room. No one outside of our immediate family who also knows about her condition has ever brought it up to me. I think if a bunch of us were ever in the same room and the subject came up in conversation, all of our brains would melt and pour right out of our ears. My sister's weight. Extremely touchy subject. She started putting on the pounds at about age 11 and hit 375 before graduating from high school, along with other eating disorder standbys like hoarding and hiding food and stealing money to buy it. Her efforts to lose weight included things like pinning swimsuit model pin-ups to the fridge for encouragement. It didn't help that she was emotionally fragile and had anger management issues. My parents apparently thought that they could avoid conflict by banning all discussion of the most visible symptom of her failed coping skills. Boy, were they wrong. They didn't tolerate the lying or the stealing. There was some memorable shouting, but there was absolutely no treatment for the actual addiction, the source of the conflict. When I was 8 until I was 10, I thought that the ghost of my grandparents' dog followed me around. I only ever imagined it, but the idea freaked my parents out, so they sent me to this kid therapy place. I don't know exactly what circumstances led to me being sent there, but I know that there were only a few sessions, and little progress was made. After one session, my dad told me to tell the therapist that I made everything up, and that I meant none of it. However, there was no further session for me to do this. I don't know why they ended, what specifically got me there in the first place, what the goal was, and why my dad suddenly wanted me to abruptly end the whole thing. What my parents never found out, I think, is that I also believed that I would legit gain superpowers, and this notion was connected to the ghost of my grandparents' dog. This whole time period is rather sensitive to me even now, because I ruined the social life for my young self until we moved to a different town for unrelated reasons, and I legitimately believed all of it. It scared my parents considerably that I might have some further undiagnosed mental disorder, though I'm fine now, as far as I know, and it's not something I can just brush off as kid stuff. There was some serious delusional shit going on, and just because the delusions were, obviously and expectedly, childish, doesn't mean that they weren't serious. It's really not something that I nor my parents want to bring up. My mom's older brother is estranged from the family. Hasn't really spoken to anyone in the family in years, though he is sporadically in touch with my mom. I don't think he even called or sent condolences when my grandmother, his mom, died recently. My mom will bring him up sometimes like, Alan has nothing good to say about our parents, but I tell him he needs to get over it. Blah blah blah. I can't even exactly remember what she says, because she is always very vague. Every single time I ask, why doesn't he talk to grandma and grandpa? Every single time she says, oh, because, and then fucking drops it. So, I guess that is the thing we don't talk about. Interestingly, several years ago I asked my biological father, my mom's first husband, why my uncle doesn't talk to my mom or their parents. He gave me an answer. He said, well, I guess no one has told you, but your grandfather used to molest your mother when she was younger. He apologized later, and she forgave him. You know, if I were in my uncle's position, I wouldn't fucking talk to them either, tbh. I haven't told my mom, because while my father has never lied to me, this information is coming to me like second hand, and I'm always wary of info like that. And also, that's not really a conversation I want to have with my mom, unless she volunteers the info herself, and even then. My 76Y/0 grandmother died of an overdose. When I reached the hospital I saw the nurse start a Narcan drip. For those of you unaware, Narcan is used to reverse the effects of opiate overdose. My uncle had just died of a heroin overdose 2 years earlier, her mom died a year earlier, and my grandpa was moved to a nursing home weeks before, and I guess she couldn't handle it anymore. She got into my grandpa's morphine left behind at the house. I loved and respected her. She was a respected woman. She was warm, kind, and had many friends, so my family wanted to keep who knew to a minimum. She was also a volunteer at the church, and you know how they can be with suicide. When she died, my aunt immediately said, what will we tell people? It was the most confusing time of my life. My grandfather came to the funeral so confused and just kept begging me to tell him what happened. Mind you, a year earlier they were both watching grandkids, living vibrant lives. My grandpa still worked. It was devastating. No one talks about it, ever. My grandfather died 12 days after her funeral. About all the abuse my brother inflicted on nearly every woman he saw. He was a rapist, child molester, and all-around abuser. He finally killed himself days after my oldest was born. He shot himself in the chest because his girlfriend/baby mama wouldn't have sex with him. He started hitting her, demanding sex, so she started to do the right thing and leave. Then he threatened to kill himself. Everyone in the family was so saddened by his accidental death, except me. I was celebrating the death of my abuser and only spoke the best of things about him. Every time I would try to speak the truth about him, I would get chastised about speaking poorly of the dead. I would always retort back, well, there isn't anything good to speak of about him. So this is a kind of personal story that I still have no idea what actually happened, but I suspect night terrors. When I was in 4th grade, I randomly hallucinated in the middle of the night that the walls and floor of my room were covered in huge spiders, and I don't mean a few here and there, I mean the walls were made of spiders and almost forming hands to come out and grab me. And worst part was I couldn't fucking move the whole time. So I just stopped sleeping for a week, and then every time I tried to sleep after that it kept happening, so I'd force myself to keep staying awake. Needless to say, my parents were terrified. I ended up in a hospital. None of the tests came back with anything, and I was fighting any tranquilizer they gave me to not sleep. It was so bad I didn't sleep for so long my brain was trying to shut down. Eventually they gave me enough high-powered drugs to keep an adult down, and after that it never happened again. My mother swears I was possessed, and I don't remember much about that week, but we just kind of pretend it never happened. Until I was 22 and hitting a super stressful patch of life in college, and it happened again. But I was older and was able to recognize it was sleep paralysis and some super fucked up hallucinations. I think I've realized the incident back then was also sleep paralysis. I was just too young to really understand what was happening and was just too horrified to sleep. But my parents swear up and down it was demon possession. My brother's hoarding. He's been without hot water since October because there is no room to move the old water heater down from the 2nd floor, which was a terrible design in the first place. We are a nation family, and he's the firstborn son, so apparently mental illness is fine and dandy. The one time I mentioned he might have mental health issues, my mom snapped at me. They live in Los Angeles, and I worry when a big earthquake hits he'll seriously get buried. I watch the Hoarders show to better understand him. He's a frugal, logical, cheap deal / freebie hoarder, which is like the worst combination, because the argument you should get rid of things to free up space in your house holds no water for him, and every argument he makes for why he has 5 of this one thing or picked up this free thing makes sense other than the fact all the stuff is getting out of control and not even being used. He's an avid reader also, and said Marie Kondo's book was triggering. My uncle on my father's side is pedophile. He raped his own sister when he was young. He then molested his son, my cousin, when he was young. My cousin molested me after. Nobody talks about it. Not even my cousin. My uncle never been talked to about it either. Never had any punishment. His daughter and wife still see him often and everyone act normal with him, despite everyone knowing what he did. And since nobody ever talks about it, I couldn't know. Maybe he raped so much more people, and same goes for his son, my cousin. But it's not all. All my uncles and aunts from my father's side are alcoholics and depressive because of their childhoods. Nobody ever talks about it either. I don't really know what happened, but it appears it wasn't good. And it's not even all. My grandma died a couple years ago. I always wondered why one of my aunt hated her so much, until I knew the truth. When my grandma was pregnant with her 5th baby, she tried to self-abort the baby in secret. She used a knitting pick inside her until it bled, and the fetus came out. She couldn't use contraceptive because my grandpa and her were super Catholic and didn't want to go against God's will to procreate, but she was pregnant with twins. The other baby survived. When my grandmother realized it, she had to keep it because it was too late. The survivor was my aunt. Nobody ever talks about it. I don't know if there's other shit. My family is really fucked up. Both sides of my family were Nazis during WWII. My grandfather on my father's side was a Nazi and his wife a war nurse, while my grandmother on my mother's side was the child of a Nazi and her husband a Holocaust survivor. Yay, the family reunions are never fun. But that's not the point of this post. A lot of my aunts, uncles, and cousins are missing fingers/toes and have mental disabilities and heart issues. I never really thought anything of it until my mother got shit-faced and laid it all out. When the Nazis attempted to create a pure Aryan race, some resorted to incest, which is the case of my family. My mother can't recall the exact members, but she knows that her grandmother's parents were uncle and aunt and my father's parents were as well. That's where this should end. But it doesn't. My family still has strong-hearted Nazis in it, who still follow through with incest. I also later found out that both my mother and father had an aunt Elena who had carrot red hair and severe OCD. No one in my imitate family likes to talk about it. Any of it. If it comes up in conversation, heads lower, and certain family members were soldiers and nothing more during the war. I still know very little about my family history, but TBH, I'm a bit scared to find out. My dad is a gun nut and alcoholic. 9 years ago he got in a fight with our neighbor when he was drunk. He rushed back to our house to take his fucking gun. My sister was crying and knocking on my door. I was asleep. She told me dad is gonna do something stupid and I have to hold him back till our uncle arrived. I tried to take the gun from him. He shot the wall. My nephew was literally less than a meter from the bullet. He ended up punching me in the face real hard. Luckily, my uncle came in time and calmed things down. Unfortunately, it's not the first nor the last time we experienced something like this, but this was the worst one so far. I never talked to him about it, and he acts like nothing happened every single time. He probably feels guilty, but he never admits his mistakes. It's been 9 years since this incident, and I still have vivid nightmares about it. No one in our family mentions this, ever. There are 2 on my dad's side that I only found out when my mom accidentally told me, and a really big one on my mom's side. The person I know to be my dad's mom is actually his stepmom. While she is the mother of my uncles, she didn't give birth to my dad. His mom divorced his dad when he was just a baby and left them both. Soon after, my grandfather married my grandmother. My great-grandmother once put up a child for adoption. That child grew up and had a kid of his own. My mom once hanged out with my dad and one of those kids at a baseball game. That person is never invited to family get-togethers. I was told it was because it was always awkward for my great-grandmother, who's been dead for over 10 years. My mother's mom basically has a Cinderella story we don't talk about because it upsets her too much. On her birthday, her dad died, and the birthday present he was carrying for her was stolen. After the death, she ended up having to live with her stepmother, who worked her way too much, just like with Cinderella. I've never really heard the full story, just a bit about it because nobody talks about it. I have a relative that lived in a farm. I have never heard about him until my mom told me. He had a son, but his son died with agrotoxics of the crops I think. And this relative killed himself a few months later. We don't talk about him. I have another one. My grandfather from my father's family was in his yard and asked my father to get something in his room. When my father came back, his father has killed himself with a gun. He was a military. I have never met him. I wasn't even born, and this was when my dad was 18 years old. Now he is 55 years old. There's no need to say I hope you're fine. Yes, I am, and I'm kind of glad I haven't met him. He wasn't a good person according to what my mother told about him. He usually arrived home drunk and used to hit my grandma, my dad and his siblings. She's alive with 90 years old. Also, I know I should understand my dad because of this trauma, but I need to say, he's a person I won't like to deal with. He wasn't my relative. He's the kind of person that doesn't give a hi to anyone and expects this person to say hi to him. Also he likes to complain about the most simple things. He just thinks the world revolves around him. But I'm just 14 years old and I need to hold on until I get to college and move away from this. Also he is a person who says he's not racist, but when sometimes he likes to say homophobic things. This makes me sad since I'm gay. So yeah, these are 2 stories of a really big list. That I was a mistake and my grandmother on my dad's side wanted my mom to have an abortion. My parents weren't dating that long, a couple of weeks, when they found out that my mom was pregnant. My grandmother and great-grandmother harassed my mom, saying she was ruining my dad's life. They would tell my mom that they wished she fell downstairs, etc. My mom moved back to Puerto Rico from New York and gave birth to me. We lived there almost 2 years with my grandmother on my mom's side until my dad flew down to come see us during Christmas. Both parents are Puerto Rican by the way. My parents ended up getting back together, got married and we moved back to New York. They had 2 more kids, my younger siblings, and managed to stay together for another 11 years before finally getting divorced. All my grandparents were never mean to me or my brothers. In fact quite the opposite. They showed us nothing but love. And my parents get along way better divorced than they did when married. I'm 34 now, and I only know because I started putting things together from photos and old story timelines. So one day I just asked my mom, while we were out getting some lunch. My brothers have no idea, because I feel like they'd resent my dad a bit. And my dad doesn't know that I know. I have an aunt and uncle on my mother's side I have never met, who never reached out to any of the family even when other relatives told them both of my mom and dad's passing. I've reached out and nothing, so have 2 of my siblings. I didn't even know about these relatives until I was an adult. When I asked both my mom and dad said it was not something they wanted to discuss. I've tried to get other relatives to discuss it, and nope, same thing. Not even the aunt and 3 uncles who remained in regular contact with my family and I grew up around who are also my mom's siblings. It's an absolute mystery to me to this day. Everyone simply says they do not want to discuss the matter and that's it. I even went through my mother's old letters and papers after her death looking for a clue and found nothing. There aren't even any pictures, except one picture of my mom's whole family I found tucked away in a book. When I was very young, 4 maybe, my mom drank a lot. Turns out she passed out and her brother raped her. I had no idea WTF happened to this day. Just that he raped her. Her BF at the time, my stepdad, beat the shit out of him and sent him to hospital. I still remember uncle coming home to grandparents. My GPA hates my mom, so he was very sympathetic to his boy. Noon and the family talks about it. Bonus, I was staying at my grand's with my brother. I was maybe 7 or so. Same uncle was still drinking. My mom, later in my life, told me he planned to rape my brother and I. He had broken up broom handles and had jars of Vada line up the hill. He was drunk and walking around the house, naked, with only a jacket on waiting for everyone to go to sleep. Thankfully, my GMA knew what was up and had one eye open. My GMA told my mom this story. None talks about this either. My families, and by proxy a few people in my culture, subtle prejudice vs LGBTQ+ people. Slurs everywhere, talking bad behind them because of their life and love choices, and giggling about them being heckled/ignored, and rarely beaten, to practice their love back home in my family's country because of a huge faith to the Roman Catholic Church. 60% of the country and nearly 90% of everyone is Christian. Who, as with most Latin American countries, the church gets special favors, can't allow them to see the light that several other countries and people either allow it or don't care enough to make it an issue. And politics wise, no, they are not conservative. I am, but liberals, at least those who actually care a bit, to vote in American politics. Another reason why I disassociate from my culture, Hispanic, and only affiliate it, because by name I'm one of them. I definitely would be a bit cautious to introduce any of my LGBTQ+ friends to them in the future. Especially a transsexual, more a MTF than a 4M. When someone talks about a bad moment doing the no pants dance. Edit. Added small comment about my culture / some of my family's intolerance about transsexuals. My step-great-grandfather, my great-grandmother's second husband, was apparently a dirty old man. He died when I was a teenager, in around 2006 or so. My mum still doesn't like talking about him. Apparently he was just generally creepy towards her when we was growing up. Also, apparently something happened between him and my mum's female cousin, but my mum's cousin would never talk about it. On that note, that cousin I mentioned is a lesbian and my mum was never told this until she asked her aunt one day. She didn't realize it until well into adulthood. It was something that everyone just knew, but they never talked about it. This was probably back in the 80s. There's a few other things, but my family stories are relatively tame for this thread. A few things. Dirty great grandpa. None of the kids were allowed to sit on his lap. Not sure what started it. My oldest cousin got in trouble for messing around with a minor. I don't know the details or how old she was. Oh, and in other news, my sister told me that my niece has a girlfriend. I'm the only one outside of her immediate family that knows, because she knew I'd be supportive. Our family is really conservative. I'm the black sheep. Oh, and I forgot, when my mom was young, 2 of her cousins had a baby conceived at the family reunion, I'm pretty sure. Oh. And I'm 31 and just recently found out that my grandpa on my dad's side had a secret second family in another state. He never divorced my dad's mom and just acted like he was going to work in another state for years. Apparently nobody checked to see if he was already married. No one knew about the second family until he died, and my dad's family was notified. So yeah, he was a piece of shit. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.